Hello and welcome back to another Fear the Walking Dead video. So today I want to review Fear the Walking Dead Season 7, Episode 7, The Portraits. Let's get right into this. So this episode feels very different to all the other episodes so far in this season. And that's because it doesn't feel as anthology as all the other episodes we've gone so far. Like, all the other episodes we've gone so far focus on one or two characters. This episode has most of the cast in, which I really like because it feels very different. Also, it makes me miss how I actually realised I actually miss the old types of stories they did, where it had all the characters in one episode, and we wouldn't like have Daniel in one episode and not see him until like episode 10 or something. Sadly, Daniel and Luciana, the two characters that have been done dirty by the new way of storytelling, are not even in this episode, where they kind of stopped doing the new way of storytelling. So every other character, even Wendell, is in this episode. Everyone but the people on the sub. And I quite like how we have lots of characters in this episode, because we've gotten used to only having one or two characters. Having a big, like, cast in an episode, I quite like it. And because we get to see everyone go, and we don't have people disappear, like we don't have John Dory go, oh, he's in episode 3. He's gone to like episode 10 or something. I quite like how we have all the characters in this episode, and they all play a role to the story. They all add something to the story. There's not a character who sits and does nothing. The closest character that does nothing is probably John Dory and Wendell, because they just sit on the roof and point down, look at the floor. That's kind of, but they all add to the story, and I quite like it. But the big focus of this episode is Strand and Morgan, and the conflict that they have, and how they have to try and team up to deal with the threat of the episode. Now let's move on to the plot of the episode, and the plot is very simple and it's very good. So the plot is that baby Morgan is sick, and Morgan has to go over to Strand to ask for help. Strand helps him. However, the stalkers come and they start throwing radioactive walkers into the building via catapult. I find that super cool. And that may sound quite boring, but there's another layer. Strand gets poisoned, and the whole plot of the subplot of this episode is Strand trying to figure out who poisoned him. He can't trust anyone. And I really like that. And then he has to kind of trust Morgan. And I really like how Strand uses baby Morgan to get advantage and be like, Morgan, you're going to help me or else I take your baby. I quite liked this because it makes Strand seem more like a villain. Like, Strand's been very little villain. He's meant to be the villain of the season, but he hasn't really been a villain. I mean, I watched this with someone else and I'm like, he comes off as a dick, not a villain. And he does in this episode. He's not really a villain, he's just a dick. But this is the most villainous Strand's been. Strand gets poisoned, what does he do? Immediately blames everyone else. He kind of alienates himself and be like, oh, I can't trust any of you, I will kill all of you just to survive. And I really like Strand kind of being mean to everyone and being a dick to everyone. However, earlier they compared him to Negan. He's not like Negan, he's just a dick. He's not a very good villain. He's a okay villain this episode, but he was even outshined by the kind of the one-off other villains of the stalkers, and you're like, okay, that's kind of annoying. Strand's meant to be the main villain of the season, but he's outshined by a sub-villain who seems more villainous than Strand. I really didn't like that. However, even though Strand is such a weak villain for the season, I feel like they could have written better to be more villainous. I did like the Morgan Strand conflict in this episode, and I thought it was very well acted and it's very believable, and they added more onto it. Morgan does something and I'm like, okay, it's a bit like over the top, but I do kind of understand, and it kind of adds more fuel to this fire. And I really like where they're going with Strand being a villain. I think maybe this is going to be the bit where it picks off. I do see this picking up, and then Strand becomes a real villain from episode 8 onwards because of what Morgan did in this episode. But I feel like so far Strand's been very weak. Well, halfway through the season Strand's been weak, but afterwards I hope he's going to be great. The Morgan Strand conflict, I feel like that is the best part of this season so far, the Morgan Strand conflict, and it's never been better in this episode because of what happens. Also, this episode is not very character focused. It's more just about pushing the story forward, which is great. This episode is not any deep dives like we've had for the last 3 episodes. Nothing like that. This is full pushing the story forwards, progressing the story, which is great because we had 3 episodes with just kind of filler. This is no filler. This is full on, let's just get the Strand arc over. Let's just make progress on the Strand arc. And I really thought the Strand arc was going to end this episode, but no, there was a big plot twist at the end of this episode, near the end, about 2/3, and it's like, okay, the Strand arc seems like it's just ramping up. It seems like we're just ramping up to the Strand arc. We're going to get a lot more Strand, I feel like, in the second half of this season. And they might do a thing where Strand will be the whole villain for the entire season, which they've never done before. They never had a villain for a whole season. I think the longest villain they've ever had, which was Logan, for 13 episodes. I think Strand's going to get to the end of the season as the main villain, which is really good. I just feel like this kind of build-up should have been shorter. This episode, I would like to see more of it. I feel like it went through slightly too fast. I would like to have seen more Morgan Strand conflict with these characters being together for the whole episode for the first time this season. They didn't fight as often as I thought they would, and I feel like that's kind of a sad thing. This episode was just slightly too fast. Things resolved too fast. I think like a big thing happened and Strand just passed out and it just skipped right past the incident. You're like, okay, well, we could have followed Morgan for a bit, but no, it just kind of go, okay, we're just going to get passed out. We're not going to know how the situation kind of fixed itself. The situation in the episode is that people are trying to break into the tower. Strand is sick, and Strand just kind of passes out like near the end of the issue, and Morgan kind of goes off and fixes it while Strand's unconscious. And I'm like, I would have liked to have seen Morgan go and fix this issue and not just wake up with Strand after it and be like, oh, well, it happened while Strand was asleep. I didn't like that. I feel that's quite lazy storytelling. I feel like, oh, we want to give a really long, last scene thing like we did last time with Al. So how we shorten this? I feel like they kind of stretched it too long. This episode should have been a bit longer. Too much was going on in this episode if they couldn't have made time for Morgan to fix the issue. I feel like that's the one issue with the pacing. Just kind of, oh, the issue's over because Morgan fixed it when Strand was passed out. Common Domingo, this episode, though, is like the star character. I really liked how he portrayed Strand in this episode as kind of a desperate character. Also, he portrayed him as slightly broken and vulnerable, but also he puts up a wall to act tough when people are around him. I quite like that. And right at the end of this episode, the episode is based around the portrait. The episode is called The Portrait. And right at the start of the episode, a portrait is painted, and Strand doesn't like it, so he throws it away. But at the end of the episode, Strand gets the portrait back, and he stares at it, and the portrait is broken. It's ripped apart. And I really like the portrait just because it represents what Strand's like right now. He's a broken man, and there's a scene earlier in the episode where he's talking to Mo, the baby, and he reveals how he's basically broken. He misses Alicia, and he's sad, and I think he's kind of jealous that Morgan's being the father that he never had to Mo. And I really like how Strand breaks down these walls to people, and then he builds them back up tougher. And he looks at this photo, and it's like, that's what Strand is. The portrait shows him as a broken man. I really like that. But the episode doesn't end there, though. I feel like one of the best parts of this episode is the way it ends. And that is Alicia returns. I feel like it's very well handled. It worked well. And that's one of the best bits. I really liked Alicia come back. And I feel like Alicia versus Strand is going to happen. And we're going to get all-out war for the back half of this season. And I'm so excited about this. Now let's move on to my one sentence overview, and this is a good time. It's not great, it's not bad, it's just a good time. This episode is watchable, and I do recommend watch it because it moves the story forwards. It's very season story orientated. It's not filler at all. There's no filler in this. It moves the story forwards. You have to watch this if you want to watch other episodes in this season. However, there is a bit of an issue with the story. I didn't quite like how Strand passes out. The issue's resolved off camera. I didn't like how there was a lot of off camera stuff happening this episode. Alicia came back, that was cool, and her comeback was dealt well. Morgan and Strand conflict was probably the best part of this episode, but what do you think about this episode? Have you watched it yet? Please tell me, I'd like to know, and I'll talk to you later. So look on the screen if you want more stuff. I recommend you'll find something else. Guaranteed you'll find something else. But goodbye, peace out, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.